Right. So I'm not sure if this is getting a lot of attention in Canada, but like um there's like an inflation tax that the government in Canada wants to like bring in if they haven't already like implemented it. So I'm going to pull up an article that will help explain what inflation is. So, because I don't think many people are aware of what like inflation is and like what it does. So I'm gonna pull up an article right now that'll help explain it all. So this is from the National Citizens Coalition. It says from Spencer Fernando. It says Trudeau's regressive inflation tax is hurting Canadians. And it says Justin Trudeau's regressive inflation tax is deliberately hurting Canadians. Then it goes on to say that here's a picture of Trudeau. More money for Canadian workers. It's BS. And then below it says if if the Trudeau government announced a new 5% tax on everything, would Canadians be happy with it? Certainly not. In fact, the Liberal government would likely face a huge drop in popularity, and mounting public outrage would force them to backtrack. They would face a lot of anger from across the political spectrum, including from the left, who would point out how regressive a new tax on everything would be. After all, millionaires and billionaires could more easily absorb such a tax as their spending on basic items, food, clothing, transportation, or a diminishing portion of their overall income. The higher their income rises, of course, their consumption would still decline, weakening the overall economy. Meanwhile, for those who have a smaller income, basic necessities are a larger portion of their overall spending, meaning a 5% tax on everything hits lower income people the hardest. People still need to buy food and clothing, and people still need to find transportation. As a result, a 5% tax on everything forces extremely difficult decisions for those who are already struggling to make ends meet. A 5% tax on everything would thus be considered a regressive tax rather than a progressive tax. A progressive tax would be a higher percentage at higher income levels. It's how the income tax system works. And it says politicians like Justin Trudeau claim to be progressive, and that is a big part of his brand. Yet we are now watching the equivalent of a regressive tax being imposed on everything. The regressive inflation tax. According to state institutions, Canada's inflation rate is 4.7%. Many doubt that number as the rise in prices appears to be much higher, and it is well known that statist politicians have a clear interest in downplaying inflation and keeping the report number as low as possible. Whatever the true rate is, it is clear that prices are rising quite rapidly. However, even that is a bit of a misnomer. It's not really that prices are going up, rather the value of our money is going down. Yeah, that's what's happening right now. As the government, they're just printing more and more money from the banks, and like it's doing is just it's like devaluing the currency. So it's like yeah, it's like there's still it's like people talk about how like taxation is theft and all that, but here this is like another form of theft. Except like the government, they don't have to go into your wallet to like steal your money. They could just they could just do it by devaluing the currency, which is what what's happening, which is what which is what's happening here exactly. So then it says that this is the danger of fiat currencies that aren't linked to anything scarce or tangible. It becomes impossible for most people to accurately gauge how the value of their money is changing, and it can only be seen in relation to the cost of goods and services. As a result, people can be subjected to the equivalent of a large tax on everything without realizing it. That's the point I made at the outset. People would be outraged if the Trudeau government announced a 5% tax on everything, as it would represent a 5% drop in their earning power. Yet, with inflation likely even higher than that, the same drop in earning power is taking place. It is merely hidden and far less obvious to most Canadians. Instead of seeing a new tax, people wonder why their money isn't going as far. People wonder why prices keep increasing, and people wonder why, with so much money supposedly flowing through the system, they feel as if they still can't afford what they could before. This is the consequence of the status big government policies of Justin Trudeau and the way the Bank of Canada has enabled those policies through rampant money printing. Note, this isn't about the temporary increase in government spending when the initial lockdowns took place. When the government ordered people to stay home, effectively shutting down a large portion of the economy, it would have been morally reprehensible if they hadn't compensated people for the consequences of government action. But now we are a year and a half removed from that initial period. Unfortunately, rather than quickly return government spending to the baseline, the Trudeau Liberals have instead exploited the crisis to lock in a huge increase in government spending, an increase they are seeking to make permanent. The Bank of Canada continued to fund that agenda through historic increase in the money supply. It was inevitable that this would result in high inflation since you have more and more dollars chasing a supply of goods that isn't growing at anywhere near the same proportional pace of the money supply. And now, even with high inflation slamming Canadians, the Trudeau government continues to double down on government intervention and higher spending, prompting warnings that they will make inflation even worse. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government is at risk of adding to Canada's inflation problem if it unveils more big ticket spending measures this fall, the Bank of Nova Scotia economist said in a note to clients. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is expected to give the government's first major statement on taxes and spending since Trudeau's Liberal Party won re election on September 2020, including tens of billions in new spending. She should refrain from adding that stimulus to an already hot inflationary environment, Scotiabank's Rebecca Young said Monday. With the Bank of Canada having only recently woken up to the danger of prolonged inflation after claiming it was transitory, Trudeau's policies could undo any corrective efforts. New spending could potentially exacerbate the pressures we are seeing right now on the inflation side, she said, so they could make the job more difficult for the Bank of Canada if they go out with a whole lot more. Trudeau wants higher inflation. It is essential for Canadians to realize that while inflation is certainly hurting them, Justin Trudeau views it as a feature, not a bug. Higher Higher inflation enables political corruption. More fiat in the hands of politicians can be given to those who do their bidding. Makes people more dependent on the state, discourages the growth of the private sector, and helps to conceal government action that is lowering our standard of living. We are witnessing a sustained attack on the economic freedom and individual freedom of Canadians, and inflation is the greatest weapon wielded by status politicians like Justin Trudeau. So I think that's the end of the article. Yeah, that's the end of the article. So, so yeah, in this article, Spencer Fernando talks about how how like how like the inflation tax the the, the Trudeau government wants to bring in, it's going to like cause more harm to Canadians, as it means their like the value of their money will decrease. So, and he also said how like it's not. He also said like how it's not because like the prices are rising, but the value of the dollar is dropping. So, because I know like many, 'cause I know it's many people talk about how everything's like becoming expensive and all that, but in reality, it's actually like the value of the dollar. The value of the dollar is like dropping, is decreasing, which is why like like the stuff you were able to afford before, like you can't afford them now because your money it's worth like much less than it was before. So yeah, and also like I know Pierre Poilievre, like he also talks about this whole inflation problem too, like in the parliament, because he's an MP, he's a politician, so he's like one of the few like politicians who's willing to talk about like this whole like inflation problem, because it's not getting a lot of attention. So yeah, like Pierre Poilievre, like he like constantly explains this whole inflation stuff to like people who don't understand like what it's about. So I suggest you start like watch his videos as well as he explains it all. So 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 this whole yeah, so like in regards to inflation, like it's not getting a lot of attention. So aside from like people like Pierre Poilievre, like it's not like really being discussed at all like in the government. So yeah, like this is a problem that like affects like every like low income or like every low income Canadian or just like regular Canadians in general. So because you're not going to be able to like afford the things you were able to buy in the past because your money is worth less with all this like money printing that's being done by the government. So yeah, like this, yeah. So I suggest people start like you know like reading, looking more into this whole inflation stuff because it's going to affect like pretty much everyone. Like aside from maybe like the super wealthy, like everyone's going to be like affected by it as your money like it's going to like the value of your money it's like constantly decreasing and like it's going to be like pretty much worthless eventually. Like yeah, it'll be worthless if all this like money printing keeps happening. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, like yeah, like people like should start like really looking into like what inflation is and like how it's like not a good thing for like regular Canadians. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to talk about, and I'll be